Just over a decade on from AMD's bulldozer line of CPUs, infamous for its performance, or lack thereof, some of them often performing worse than the previous generation's chips, and the legal disputes over whether or not the core count was what AMD said it was, chips like the FX-4300 can be had pretty cheap. So let's find out what sort of performance £8 can buy today, shall we? So, like I said, £8, or roughly around $11 is what I paid for my FX-4300 from CEX here in the UK, which is a far cry from the cheap at the time $122 you would have paid for its release back on October 23rd, 2012. That's around $151 today. So what exactly would that sort of money have bought you a decade ago? Well, there are additional specs on screen now, but the basics are you got 4 cores, split into 2 dual-core modules, based on the updated pile driver architecture running at 3.8 GHz, but depending on conditions could boost up to 4 GHz. And despite the lawsuits, that is 4 physical cores, so fight me. There's also support for DDR3 memory in dual channel, and PCI Express Gen 2 support as well. One thing AMD is well known for doing with their CPUs, at least recently anyway, is leaving the multiplier unlocked. That's the bit that the base clock is multiplied by to get the actual speed the CPU runs at, which allows for relatively easy overclocking, although as you'll see later on, you don't exactly get much more performance for the huge jump in power draw that comes with overclocking FX series CPUs. Specs for the system I'm using will be down in the description below, but for now, let's fire into the first benchmark. So Cinebench R20 is first up today, and this is where I also test the power draw as well, as Cinebench fully loads the processor and makes it relatively easy for me to measure power, as I can leave the benchmark running while I watch a clamp meter I use to get power draw, as opposed to doing it when in-game where I need to keep my eyes on the screen. With scores from other processors on the left for reference, the FX-4300 manages 632 points, while pulling 64.39 watts, plus or minus 3%, which is CPU-only power draw and not power draw from the wall. This score is roughly 40% down on what the lower clocked, but also quad-core i5-3550 manages, although that did cost significantly more than the 4300 did. CSGO is kicking it off for the game tests today, and for this I'm using the competitive settings available at .esports.com. And considering that CSGO released the same year the FX-4300 did, you'd be forgiven for thinking it would perform pretty well. But the game has become harder to run since then, and it shows. While it ran reasonably well for the most part, there was a brief hitch every 60 to 80 seconds or so. And that was on top of some pretty severe stuttering in the first round when your teammates and enemies were around you, which initially made close combat quite difficult. This is a bot match, by the way, so performance may differ slightly from online. Looking at the frame time graph here, a frame time being the amount of time it takes for a frame to be shown to the user, with a steady 60 FPS being equivalent to a frame time of 16.67 milliseconds, you can see the hitches we saw represented as spikes like this, that last for around 90 to 115 milliseconds. 2016's Doom, running at 1080p using max settings, but with AA, depth of field, bloom and the lens effects disabled, actually runs really well all things considered. Throughout the first and second missions, the frame rate never drops below the low 50s, and even then only in the most intense battles. There are occasionally very brief hitches throughout, with a couple of occasions of light micro-stuttering too. There's also a slight slowdown in gameplay that I saw in the battle just outside of the airlock in the second mission, but other than that, the game runs great. Forza Horizon 5 is another story though. While the game is at least playable at 1080p with the lowest settings, and using a 60 FPS cap to reduce the most severe stuttering, races take quite a while to actually load, with the game itself taking a while to start up as well. It actually appeared to freeze during the startup. Despite the frame rate cap, the 4300 still has issues with noticeable stuttering throughout races. This isn't overly intrusive, but it can get more noticeable with the FPS dropping to the mid-40s at times. Overall though, it is still quite playable, but it's not going to be the smoothest of experiences. Oh, and there could also be occasions where some textures might be missing as well. It only happened the once during the test, but it could possibly happen elsewhere too. I was actually expecting GTA 5 to run better than it did, but at 1080p with high settings, no AA and normal shadows, there was noticeable stuttering throughout the city, both at night and during the day. More so at night due to the shadows, so disabling them might improve things a little. Things got slightly smoother the further away from the city centre that you got, but overall the game maintained a noticeable but not overly intrusive amount of micro stutter throughout. There weren't any other issues throughout the game other than that though. Another new one to the benchmark today, alongside Forza, is Battlefield 5. Testing it at 1080p with the lowest possible settings in DirectX 11 mode, and using the Under No Flag campaign for the test, as I'm not quite sure the best way to benchmark the game yet. And despite me using the lowest settings, the game does still manage to look quite good, so it's no surprise that the FX chip really struggles with it. Frame times are generally quite inconsistent throughout the test, which you see as quite noticeable micro-stuttering. That's alongside brief hitches that happen throughout gameplay as well. Nothing that makes it unplayable, but it's not exactly smooth either. And to give you an idea of just how many hitches we see throughout, let's have a look at the frame time graph on screen now, where you can see just how often they happen. Some are noticeably more severe than others, as you can see from the larger spikes like these ones. So while the game is technically playable, at least in the missions I played anyway, it's never going to be a smooth experience. When it comes to overclocking, the FX family of CPUs are well known for how far they can go, with the current world record for CPU frequency still being held by a FX-4300, which Finnish overclocker Distilled managed to get to 8.723 GHz using liquid nitrogen cooling, a record that stood for over 7 years at this point. Things can't be pushed that hard without that sort of cooling though, but on standard air cooling, like what I'm using for this test, this particular FX-4300 still managed to break the 5 GHz barrier, final clocks of 5.02 GHz, but needing 1.512 volts to do so. In Cinebench R20, this causes power draw to jump significantly to 128.23 watts plus minus 3%, compared to just over 64 watts pre-overclock. That near 100% increase in power though doesn't translate to a 100% increase in score. In fact, the score only jumps 21% to 766 points. I was expecting a far bigger increase, but it just goes to show how inefficient AMD's FX family of processors were. For reference, the dual-core Athlon 3000G, based on AMD's Zen architecture, is capable of nearly 900 points in the same test. CSGO does actually see a pretty decent improvement. There's still a brief hitch at points throughout, but not like it was pre-overclock. Otherwise, the game actually runs pretty smoothly for the most part. Looking at the frame time graph again, you're seeing the pre-overclock graph in green on top of the orange one for the overclock. And you can see that, in general, there's actually pretty much the same sort of hitches happening at the same sort of frequency. But to my eyes though, performance was noticeably better with the overclock despite this. 2016's Doom improves on the already surprisingly good performance I had pre-overclock, dropping no lower than around the mid-60s FPS wise now in the most intense battles. It still has the odd brief hitch at points throughout, and possibly some very slight microstutter too, although I'm not actually sure if I was just imagining that or not. Either way, it runs great, and the overclock has actually managed to fix the slight slowdown in gameplay during the battle just outside of the airlock in the second mission as well. Forza Horizon 5 still has the same issues it does pre-overclock, but they do happen less often and are less severe. The game manages to feel a lot smoother now, while still having noticeable micro-stutter at times, with FPS dips into the 40s as well. These dips happen less often too, although they're still reasonably noticeable when they happen. Both the races and the game itself also load quicker now too, but it is still noticeably slower than my personal system, which has a Ryzen 5800. GTA 5 manages to improve a little bit, although in parts the micro stuttering is still pretty noticeable and might actually be worse than it was pre-overclock. We mainly see improvements in the city during the daytime where there are fewer shadows. At night, the stuttering is still pretty bad there. Parts of the game can also run relatively smoothly to the point that it was actually hard to tell at the time if what I was seeing was actually micro stuttering or the sort of stuttery-like appearance you can get when you don't have VSync on. That was probably true for stock clocks too, to be fair though. I just didn't pick it up as something I should be noting down. Overall, Battlefield 5 doesn't really see any notable improvements from the overclock. Gameplay is still really stuttery throughout, with noticeable hitches still happening at points throughout as well. Like pre-overclocked performance though, there's nothing particularly game-breaking as far as issues it has go, and the game is still playable, but it is a far from smooth experience still. So, to conclude, if you're looking to build an ultra-cheap PC for older games, you'd probably be better off going with a similarly priced Intel Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge quad-core, like the 3450, which at the time of writing can be had for only £4 more on CEX than what I paid for the FX chip. To be fair, I don't actually know what the 3450 performs like, but I can't imagine it not being better than the 4300. I was also expecting more from the overclock as well, but that just goes to show that even a big overclock can't make up for a relatively poor architecture. So I want to finish off by saying thanks to Patreon supporters Mattis Derak and Shadow in the Void, and thanks to the rest of you as well for watching my video on one of AMD's infamous FX CPUs. You're seeing some leftover footage from the pre-overclocked benchmarks just now, by the way. But yeah, I enjoyed making this one as it was the first Bulldozer CPU I've had to test before. I mean, technically it's pile driver and not Bulldozer, but Bulldozer's a name I imagine most people will know it as. But anyway, thanks again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.